Yeah, we can get started. Good evening, all. This is Nizar, co-founder of Sitecore User Group Chennai. Hope you are all doing well. It's a privilege to have Peter, who is one of the Sitecore MVP and a well-known person in the Sitecore community. Today, he will take us through a webinar on our framework or accelerators, EVIL, should you care about SXA JSS. Hope it's an interesting topic. On behalf of SUG Chennai, welcoming you, Peter, and extending my warm welcome to all the participants. Over to you, Peter. We are very curious to hear from you.
Thank you, Nizar, for the introduction and for the greeting. So yeah, let me share my screen then. So hi everyone, and welcome to my session about frameworks, libraries, SDKs. Of course, as this is a Sitecore user group talk, I will talk about our build-out Sitecore SXA and JSS modules and how they belong to this topic. So yeah, let's take a look what I have prepared for you today. I will start with a brief definition of words, phrases that I will use throughout this session. I will then continue with the Sitecore SXA and JSS, a bit like what are the benefits, what are their drawbacks. We will start with some definition. We will talk about also like whether you should use them or not, and when to use them and not. So there are various, let's say, there are various conditions when to use them and when not. So yeah, we will talk about lots of things today. But first, let me quickly introduce myself if you don't know me yet. So my name is Peter Prochaska. I work for Accenture for more than 11 years. I've have more than 8 years of experience with development Sitecore. I was doing Sitecore, the usual ASP.NET MVC, Sitecore Commerce, Sitecore SXA, Sitecore JSS. So more or less everything, like something from everything from in Sitecore world. I have also 15 years of experience with ASP.NET MVC, web forms, ASP Classic. So really like broad backend knowledge or backend development. But last couple of years, I've been shifted to a different tool set and languages. So more or less, as I was architecting and leading Sitecore JSS projects, I moved to write JavaScript and React code. So I know a bit from everything. So basically, like a full stack is the word for that. You can find me on my blog or LinkedIn or Twitter, or if you're interested, you can see what I'm reading currently on Goodreads. In my spare time, I'm spending a lot of time with my family, of course, or running, as you can see on the picture, or I'm blogging or helping Sitecore community. So this presentation is about libraries, SDKs, and frameworks, whether you should use them or not, when to use them, whether they are hurting you or helping you at the end. So let's take a look what are these terms meaning and what are the conditions when to use them. Developers use these terms like library and frameworks lots of times interchangeably, but I would like with this presentation show you that there are certain differences. So basically with library, or let's start with library. Simply put, it's like a packaged reusable chunk of code that performs a certain function or set of closely related functions. You can insert the library into your application and call it when you need it to implement that function without having to write the code from scratch. Suppose that instead of an application, you are building a house. One of the things that you will need to that house is a stove, but it will not be very practical, of course, for you to build it from scratch when you could just buy it one off the shelf, right, in a shop. So a library is, you can think about it, is to an application what the stove is to that house if you are building the house. The SDKs have a wider scope than the libraries do. In fact, all SDKs will contain one or more libraries. An SDK is a collection of libraries, APIs, documentation, utilities, and sample codes that help you implement certain features without having to do the work from scratch. So something similar as the libraries, but with lots of additional materials or lots of additional things that help you use that piece of code, that set of functions. SDKs vary in scope and function from implementing a feature or set of features to build the whole application for a specific platform. For example, as in case of Sitecore Jss, if we think about it. So going back to our house analogy, if a library is a stove, then the SDK would be a whole kitchen. While you can go and buy all your kitchen appliances, cabinets, and counters separately, it will be a lot easier, of course, to buy a full kitchen set, complete with built-in appliances and instructions on how to assemble it. So we can think of SDK that you just go to a shop, buy a full kitchen set, and that's it. SDKs can be limited in scope, such as in case with one room, but they can also have a bigger scope of a collection of rooms or even the whole house. The frameworks, on the other hand, are in many ways the inverse of libraries and SDKs. They are also a collection of libraries, APIs and utilities, and documentation. So something similar as the SDKs, but they solve common programming requirements, so you don't have to do the work yourself. However, they do that by giving you a foundation on top of which you can build your application, rather than giving you the building blocks. So basically, the libraries and SDKs are giving you the functions, the building blocks. Of course, also the frameworks contain these functionalities, so these functions and set of functions, but they're also giving you a foundation. So basically like a set of functionalities that are enhancing the language that you are using the framework on, or a platform, like in this case, Sitecore. While you insert a library into your application and call it from your code to perform certain functions, frameworks require you to insert your code into them, and they call your code at the right moment. So you can think of it as a, like when you are creating a pipeline in Sitecore, you have Sitecore as a framework or as a platform. You create your pipeline, but more or less you need to create a configuration or config patch that will more or less run that piece of code. So basically, Sitecore decides based on the configuration when that pipeline will be run, right? But you need to tell the framework or the Sitecore when you would like to run it. In our house analogy, if we continue that way, a framework will be exactly that, the house's framework. It is a collection of beams and posts upon which you build your rooms, complete with electrical wiring and plumbing. Having this ready-made structure upon which you can build your house will save you a huge amount of time and effort, of course. So if we take a look like how we can look at the libraries and SDKs and frameworks, the main difference between the frameworks and using the SDKs and libraries is the inversion of control. The diagram shows that when an application code uses a library or SDK, the developer writing the code is in charge of the application flow. This means the developer decides when to call the library, right? However, when we use a framework, the framework decides when to call the library. This shift in control is well known in software development as a design pattern called the inversion of control. So to summarize, a framework enables coding environment that contains low-level libraries to address conventional coding issues. The objective of a framework is to deliver faster development of an application. This includes everything we need to build large-scale applications, such as templates based on best practices. So if we are using a web framework, it calls the code through a request response model. For example, for a web application, JavaScript framework provides a skeleton with the tools for fast development. Internally, such kind of framework contains a large collection of libraries that provides the developer with inbuilt functionalities, which helps to develop an application without extensive coding knowledge. In the table here, you can see the differences. So, for example, the libraries and frameworks helps us to reuse a software function, right? The library, the framework helps us to develop a software application quickly. So there are lots of similarities between them because the framework itself is using some kind of libraries, or it's also a set of libraries at the end. I think the biggest difference is that the library or the SDK has some sort of limited kind of function, or the function that it is bringing. For example, there are libraries to operate with the dates, with strings, and so forth. But the framework itself is more or less encompassing lots of functionalities. Like the .NET framework, for example, you have lots of classes that you can use for the communication, right, between the servers, for operating with the strings, with numbers, with there are lots of functionalities that you can use. So what are some benefits of the libraries? They improve performance of a program by selective inclusion of a library. They provide reusable functions that can be referred to within the code. They eliminate the need for writing the code for complex functions. They also eliminate the reinventing of the wheel. So why would I bother with developing some functionality or some function if there is already an npm package for the same, right? It's also preventing us from having to write the code to solve the same problem over and over again. And definitely, I think the biggest one is to reduce development cost. Of course, everything has pros and cons, also the libraries. So it's really hard to change the library once you start to use it, right? So if you are using one library to operate with dates, for example, with JavaScript, there is a date FNS, right? There were lots of other libraries that you could use to operate with the dates, but they have a different sort of logic. They behave a bit differently, so it's really hard sometimes to just exchange one library to another, even though they do the same, right? Sometimes also the developer that is maintaining the library abandons the project. Therefore, there is no support, no bug fixes, no no new features that are developed for the library. So you need to do this exchange of the library. There is also lack of support by the developers. Sometimes they just, uh, release the package, release the library, and then for many months there is no change, and you are awaiting maybe some changes, but yeah, maybe in the future nothing comes. Also, sometimes libraries are vulnerable to malicious attacks. Also, there are some security concerns and so forth. But what's good is that for the libraries which are really maintained properly, uh, it's helping you at the end, because if you are using them, your application is more secured, because lots of issues and lots of security holes that are in applications are in these libraries solved. So we don't need to solve them once again by yourself when you unfortunately find them in production or and so forth. So some well-known libraries, probably React, which is a really well-known JavaScript library to build user interfaces. Then there is a jQuery, which was at certain point of time the only library for JavaScript that was helping cross-browser development, fixing some issues with the JavaScript language itself, but nobody's using it nowadays, right? There is a D3 JavaScript library for producing dynamic data visualizations, right? So it has really nice functions. There is underscore JavaScript utility library that is helping you with lots of programming tasks that you don't need to care about anymore. The Lodash is also a JavaScript library that if you need to work with numbers, arrays, strings, objects, it's much better than with the vanilla JavaScript, right? There is a date FNS, which is a really nice one for manipulating dates, and the list goes on. If we take a look on the benefits of the frameworks, again, less code, right? Lots of functionality already in the framework itself. You can also, we can also think about it that it enables the faster methods for the web development with that less code. It's not only that you are building less code, but the user can extend the framework, of course. So usually by selectively overriding it, you can think of it like also Sitecore, right? So if you are if you would like to change some pipelines, you just write a patch config and you are exchanging one pipeline that is built in Sitecore with another one. So it's really easy for you to extend Sitecore itself or some modules that we will talk about later on. Also, it's usually frameworks support cross-platform application development, and they also reduce development costs, right? Because if you are creating less code, it is less error prone, let's say, the solution. Therefore, also it reduces the development cost, right? Because you don't need to more or less fix the bugs that you would normally do if you are building similar functionalities that are built into the framework itself, right? And lots of times the frameworks are also giving you some rich content like components and so forth, so you don't need to deal with them. Of course, there are also some limitations, so that the frameworks are preventing you from gaining some in-depth understanding or knowledge of the language or tech that you are using. That's usually the thing that you start to learn .NET framework, right? But you know lots of methods from there, but you don't know lots of times how to write the proper C#, right? And so forth. So there is also a learning curve, right? So if you are starting to learn C# plus .NET framework itself, then uh, you are not just learning C# itself, so the language, but you also need to learn the .NET framework. So all of those methods for string manipulation, for example, right? You need to also understand like where to use string format, where to use string interpolation, right? Lots of things that you need to learn. But I think that at the end, it will give you the benefit that it will speed you up, right? So basically, the learning curve is only at the beginning, and then you are more or less using what you have learned. Of course, the thing is that usually these frameworks have new versions. Therefore, you again need to learn what was changed, how to deal with the changes. You probably also need to upgrade your applications, your solutions, right, to the newest version, because as programmers or developers, we usually want to be on the latest version, right, using the latest features of that language, that framework. So yeah, that's the usual cycle. Also, sometimes tweaking framework is hard. So lots of things which are in framework, how they work, how they function. It's really hard to change it. So you need to be really careful when you are choosing the framework for your solution. What would be the best fit, and so forth. So, for example, if we are talking about various frameworks, we have the .NET, right? Which is the cross-platform successor of a .NET framework. We have a Next.js, which is like an open source web application development framework built on top of React, right? Which has a really nice server-side rendering as on top, and also it's generating static websites. So it's like if you are building projects with Next.js, it's something similar to the React, but it already has some changes in folder structure that you need to adhere to. There are also some functionalities that are working a bit differently to React, so you need to learn lots of these kind of nuances. But if you embrace them, then it will definitely help you at the end. You have Angular, you have Bootstrap, you have Ember.js, you have Vue.js. So if we are just think about it on this slide, we have like 5 front-end frameworks that you can choose from, or 4 of them because Bootstrap is not something similar to the Next.js or Vue.js or Angular or Ember. But yeah, they are like it's always hard to choose which framework to use because usually the team members already know some of them, right? Also, client usually already know what they would like to use. So it's always at the beginning of the project. It's like a really hard decision that needs to be made because it's really hard during the project to exchange, right? So if you start with Next.js or Vue.js or Next or whatever, it's really hard to just switch them. And then we have also Spring, so just to fulfill the list with one framework that supports also Java. But yeah, the list can go on. It's really like lots of things that are happening in the JavaScript community. Each day there are lots of new frameworks that are arising. So we also need to understand at what point, at what maturity level each framework is on. So you can really like choose it, that you can say like, okay, this is the one that we would like to use because it has benefits, right? Like if we already use React, or if we already used React as a library in our previous projects, Next.js can bring us lots of new functionalities that we could embrace and we don't need to care about, right? Because lots of times previously we were doing the React development and we're using some libraries to do the server-side rendering, or you were wiring things up. With Next.js, more or less everything is bundled together. You don't need to do the setup at the beginning. You don't need to do any configuration. It's already out of the box, right? So you just need to install it and use it. That's it. So we know what are the libraries, what are SDKs, what are frameworks, but in Sitecore, we hear a lot about SXA and JSS. So let's take a look whether there are libraries, frameworks, or SDKs. So Sitecore SXA or Sitecore Experience Accelerator is I would say, really great example of a framework. So on top of Sitecore, as also the diagrams shows, that you have a ASP.NET. On top of that, you have Sitecore as a framework or as a platform. And then on top of it, you have SXA. So you just install it and it will create like a really nice solid foundation of a new Sitecore functionalities. Uh, it's also giving you uh, lots of new components that you can use for development. So I think SXA is really a nice example of a framework that is really like embracing the platform itself. It is also following the Helix principles. So I would say it's really like a nice example of how to build the solutions or how to build the real projects following the Helix principles. So really like if you wish to do the Helix uh, and or to follow Helix on your projects properly, you can definitely like install SXA, take a look how it's built, how the items are structured, and so forth, and maybe inspire. But definitely, I would encourage you to take a spin with SXA and do some development with it. It's a bit different than the usual Sitecore, right? We will talk about it later on, but definitely, like I would say, there are more benefits than the drawbacks of SXA. So, for example, what the SXA is bringing you is this kind of screen. So usually when you are like creating your own tenants and sites, it's really like cumbersome work because you need to create the branch templates to really specify all of the pages you would like to have under the sites, all of the folders or all of the configurations, images or whatever. With SXA, it is like out of the box. It is supporting multiple sites and with multiple instances, tenants, sites. You can more or less choose whether to do the one-to-one translation for the sites, or you would like to have everything in one place, or more or less store it within different sites with different language versions. So there are lots of possibilities how you can combine the tenants and sites. Uh, then you can choose from the modules itself. So like within this framework, you have the modules, and you can pick for each site different set of modules, which will give you some enhancements on the Sitecore itself, like pipelines and so forth. And also it will give you some components, right? So with SXA, these modules will eventually give you some components out of the box that you don't need to create, and you just need to customize them if you think about it. And the way what I was saying before is that with Sitecore, you just usually create rendering, right? And that's it for the component, right? So you just use Unicorn or something else to serialize that item, and within the next deployment, that component will be available for content editors to be chosen, right? With SXA, you need to wire things up a bit differently. You create modules, for example, like this one, the new module, really cool name of the module. So with this approach, you create a new module, you assign that rendering to that module. So once somebody is creating a new site, they can pick that module, and then that module will be available uh, on the toolbox, or the component will be available for content editor. So it's a bit different kind of working with Sitecore, but I think it's beneficial than uh, I think it's more beneficial. It's a bit different flow, but a beneficial one, I would say at the end. We were talking about the modules, so this is really like you either add modules with the during creation of the site, or you can like the SXA is using the Sitecore PowerShell extensions, and they also extended it. So those PowerShell extensions were extended with some further functionality, which SXA brings. One of them is to add side module. So even though that you won't tick that, you can still add some modules. So you can specify the site theme, as you can see here. You can copy the layouts. You can set up the security. You can add side languages. So lots of things are like eased up by extensions that SXA adds you. There are also the concept of the page and partial designs and rendering variants, where you can more or less specify what pages or what components will be on which pages. So instead of going to standard values on particular page template, you just create page design, you create partial designs, then you combine them together, and more or less you are then specifying for each page template a page design, and then you will have those components. So it's really much easier for content editors than to create these kind of repetitive things, and also for the developers, because these things usually were up on developer shoulders, that we had to specify what components will be out of the box on that page template and so forth. With the page designs and partial designs, more or less the content editors are the ones who are preparing this themselves, and they can choose what components they would like to see on which page template. With rendering variants, they have even possibility to change the generated HTML, which I think is really cool feature of SXA. Then we have a toolbox where you can more or less drag and drop components or renderings from. This is really cool feature of SXA. I really like this one, or like this one, because I'm not doing SXA development anymore, as I'm shifted to JSS, but this was really like a cool feature. Unfortunately, it's not supported in JSS projects, but yeah, I was really hoping to have it in the future. Let's see. Then there is also a snippet, a really cool thing in SXA, where you can combine various renderings to some kind of reusable group. So you just use the snippet to add, for example, the image, the rich text and text together. So you don't need to create another component like we were used to before, right, with the MVC. But within SXA, you just use the snippet, put their components inside, and then you can reuse snippet on various other places. You can even do the cloning of the snippet. So like when you first use the snippet, it will just copy it from the global one, and it will be reused on that page, and you can more or less change a bit the snippet. So it's like a initial version of the snippet. So really cool things can be done with these components from SXA. I really like them. Sometimes they are hard to customize, of course, but yeah, that's the thing with the frameworks, that lots of things are built in, lots of things can be customized, but it's not that you have the code and you can really easily change it. With the SXA, lots of things can be changed easily, right? But as this is, for example, generating some CSS classes, if you would like to follow a different approach for naming of the CSS classes, it's causing the trouble, which we had also before. So yeah, but that's the drawback of using the frameworks. Sitecore JSS, or nowadays it's called Sitecore JavaScript Rendering SDK, represents a set of JavaScript packages and sample applications that add support for JavaScript frameworks and enable the development of modern applications that consume Sitecore data. So as you can see, we have the vanilla JavaScript, we have the React, and on top we have Sitecore JSS. This is like one of the examples. We could have there Angular or Vue.js. So more or less on top of the library or framework of your choice, you will get another set of JavaScript packages that you can use, that you need to use with JSS, and it will bring you lots of functionalities. It will more or less enable you to create solutions that can really easily read data from Sitecore. We are on a thin line with this, whether it is still an SDK or a framework, because to run Sitecore JSS, you need to have the headless services installed, which is again some kind of framework of its own, right? Like if you think about it this way, but I would call JSS as SDK because it's really like just at the end of the day, when you are, let's say, from the development point of view, when you are building the solutions using JSS, it's really just a set of npm packages and some documentation and some APIs that you are using. So I would call JSS as a really nice example of SDK. If we also talk about what kind of yeah, so the headless services support the functionality of Sitecore rendering as SDKs, and they are described on the following diagram. So basically, with the headless services, so previously it was called Sitecore JavaScript Services, as also my title on the left side says. Recently, it was renamed to Headless Services to support also the ASP.NET Core or .NET Core SDK. So more or less, you can now also do the headless development with the .NET Core. But as you can see here, not all of the functionalities are being used, like the dictionary service and also the import service. With Sitecore JSS, they support lots of front-end libraries and frameworks. We have mentioned that the React is a library, Next.js, Angular, and Vue are frameworks, and also there is a React Native which is supported experimentally. So yeah, I have experienced with or I have experience with React on my past projects with Sitecore JSS. I can just say that it was really like a really nice experience. Of course, the learning curve was a bit higher for us at the beginning, but I think we have embraced it really nicely. We are looking forward, maybe for the next project, we will use the Next.js instead, just to bring us yeah, some new functions and new experience for the developers. Yeah, so the frameworks like Next.js reduce the development overhead, and they also standardize some development patterns. So what are some enhancements of Sitecore JSS that is bringing on top of Sitecore? You can use the CLI. So basically from your Visual Studio Code or your editor, you can just use the node-based command line tool to install npm packages to create new projects, to run your application in the disconnected mode or connected mode and so forth. So it's really like a real nice command line tool to help you create and maintain your applications. Then there is a core JavaScript package for leveraging Sitecore headless services. There is also an abstraction for the front-end developers that allow working with Sitecore declaratively. And basically, you will get lots of utility functions and front-end components. For example, for React, you have lots of high order components like with translations, Sitecore context, and lots of other things that you can use in your components. You have also possibility to really easily get the field values from the layout service response and so forth. With Sitecore Jss, you have two topologies that you can use, the headless one and the integrated one. Just quickly, the headless one, uh, the CD server is not serving directly the public website, but instead a cluster of some Node.js servers host the public-facing website. So more or less the heavy lifting is on the Node.js server, not the CD. The CD is only used to get the data. If we, let's say, simplify the things, right? So the rendering of the application itself is done on the server side. So the proxy is doing it. For the integrated mode, more or less the heavy lifting is fully done on the CD server. So basically the CD is generating the API request and also is generating the HTML at the end. So what are some benefits and drawbacks of the SXA and JSS? So I would say that the biggest benefit is that you don't need to create your own company framework, like also within our company, and I heard it lots of times, and also when we were, let's say, supporting our clients with upgrading Sitecore from previous version to a new one, where their old solution was built by another company, they were using their own framework and so forth, and it was always like really hard to do the upgrade and maintenance of this. So I would say Sitecore, the SXA and JSS were created using some best practices how to do Sitecore development for both either the Sitecore MVC, that's for SXA, or the headless development for JSS. I think Sitecore knew what to do. They more or less collected the feedback from their customers, from their from the partners who implemented the previous solutions, and I think that they choose the best from this feedback, and that's why the SXA is really cool enhancement of the Sitecore platform itself for building MVC applications, and JSS is really helping front-end developers to do the front-end work right at the end. So they really have really nice API, the layout service that brings the values that you need to show at the end of the pages, right? So always the problem with this kind of frameworks that you are maintaining in your company is that the who is maintaining it, right? And the upgradability of these kind of frameworks was always a problem at the end. With this, you don't need to deal with it, right? Because Sitecore is more or less upgrading these modules. Even SXA has some upgrade scripts. So once you are running upgrade of Sitecore, SXA is more or less upgrading its own. It's also upgrading the content that you build. So it's really like cool to use SXA for development, because the upgradability thing is like you don't need to care about it anymore. These kind of frameworks and libraries or SDKs are simplifying many tasks and challenges. Like again, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. For example, if you just choose the framework for JSS, you can really easily, if you are already used to doing solutions with React.js or with Angular or with Vue.js, you can really easily just learn the nuances or the new things within JSS, and you can really quickly start to build the components for Sitecore. So you don't need to build your own wiring up Sitecore API between the front end and Sitecore itself, but you have the headless services, which will give you the API, and you can just use JSS, right? Also, you can focus on the application development itself, so you don't need to, let's say, for example, with the SXA, you don't need to deal with components like carousel, title of the page, and lots of other things. You don't need to deal with some simple components because you have the rendering variants, right? You can really focus on components that bring business value to your customers. There are also standardizing coding practices, and I think this is the biggest benefit. So basically, if you take a solution from a different company for your customer, and it's built on top of either JSS or SXA, at least you will find some common coding practices that you can really quickly start to follow, right? Because they already they are somehow prescribing you how to create components, how to create teams in SXA, right, and so forth. So it's really easy for you to just take the old solution and more or less start to maintaining it or do the upgrade or these kind of things, right? Because the coding with SXA and JSS is a bit standardized, right? So it's not like that. We have our own framework. It's this point is somehow related to the first one, right? So you don't need to you don't need to create your own framework. You don't need to create your own coding standards, right? The SXA is following Helix principles. So if you follow what is in SXA, you will also follow Helix principles if you follow them correctly, right? Or if you follow what is in SXA. And I think the biggest benefit is the community itself, right? So if you go to Slack, if you go to Stack Exchange, there are lots of questions already or answers and answers that can help you, right? On Slack, there are lots of people who probably already had similar issues as you are facing, right? So they can definitely help you. It's not like that. Again, if we come back to the first framework point, right, that you have a company framework, if there is a problem with your framework, you need to deal with it. You need to fix it, right? You need to do the upgrade. If you are on Slack and you have some problem with SXA or JSS, probably somebody already had that issue, right? So they can help you. It's again standardized, right? It's the same thing. Or if there is some issue with a certain version of SXA or JSS, it's really quick for you to ask Sitecore support, maybe to already give you the patch or to create a one for you. Some of the drawbacks, of course, again, everything has its pros and cons, right? The learning curve, I would say, is the biggest drawback. You are learning Sitecore, you are, let's say, provisioning it, everything is fine, you can do your job nicely. With SXA or JSS, the things slightly change. For example, as I mentioned to you with SXA, you need to create modules when you are creating new renderings, right? You need to add them to sites. You need to deal with rendering variants. You need to deal with themes. You need to deal with a bit different approach with the page and partial designs. But if you learn it, you will definitely benefit because you don't need to deal with them as a developer anymore, right? Because they're a part of SXA. You can just use them. You can show them to the client like this is working this way. You need to care about that anymore as a developer. You can really focus on bringing the business value. Another one, the second disadvantage I would say is that if you are, let's say, new to Sitecore completely, and now the approach is that in your solution you will use either SXA or JSS. It's not that you are just you need to learn how to build the components with Sitecore MVC, but you also need or React or Vue.js with JSS, right? But you also need to learn SXA. And the problem is that if you learn SXA, if you just focus on how to build the components with SXA, you won't know how it was in the good old days, if you call it that way. how to create those MVC components, what kind of classes you need to inherit to make it work, right? Because if you would like to create Sitecore SXA components, you are more or less inheriting a different classes. You need to deal with different problems, right? And that's also the thing with these frameworks or libraries, that you are not dealing, you are dealing with a bit different problems than with the platform itself, right? So if you are building components, if you are doing Sitecore MVC, you are, let's say, doing it one way. But if you are using SXA, you are doing it completely differently. So the heavy lifting in this case is on the framework itself lots of times, but then you don't go too much in deep in that in the development, right? And then of course the unnecessary extras, right? With the frameworks or with the libraries, lots of times you have, for example, in libraries you have code that you won't use. There are some functions, right? Or the libraries are set of functions, right? So lots of times you just won't use them, right? Those functions, they are just, you are picking what functions you will call, right? So there is some kind of dead code, let's put it this way, or the code that won't run. Yeah, so it's not used, right? So you are getting it but not using it. So it's, yeah, but that's the problem of the frameworks and libraries. So what are some decisions or when to choose the SXA, I would say. So if you know Sitecore MVC development, and I think it's really easy for you to start using SXA. If you also follow Helix, then it's I think like a perfect combination. It will definitely speed you up. It will help you with time to market. For example, like I saw lots of benefits when we were using SXA on our projects, that basically from the beginning we just installed SXA, and the content editors could already start building the pages, even though that they were not, let's say, one-to-one as the design says, right? But already we had the components, already we had the content itself there. We could use it for testing purposes, so we were more or less syncing back what the content editors were doing to the development machines, and it was really like much easier setup than it was before, when there were lots of weeks and months that everybody was waiting at least for some components to be created. Then we were deploying it, then the content creation started. With SXA, this can more or less happen in parallel, because there are lots of components already inside of SXA that you can use. And really, for in our solutions, there were small, I would say, or they were really just we were building components that were not part of SXA, and we were like that were bringing some business value. But lots of times we were either reusing the components, or with snippet, let's say, creating like a really nice group of components that were reused on various pages. So more or less the front end team was just customizing the components that were out of the box to look like based on the design. So that's the only thing that you more or less need to do with the pre-built components. If also the team is seeking something new, definitely go with SXA. If you more or less are also looking into going more ASP.NET Core, then the headless services with ASP.NET Core could be maybe a better option, right? Also, if content editors want to have more freedom, definitely, if they wish to have customized render HTML, rendering variants is a perfect solution. They can use page and partial designs, right, to create the layouts for the page templates. So developers don't need to deal with these anymore. So there are lots of things with SXA that is pre-built. You just need to configure it. Content editors just need to use them, and yeah, that's it. For the JSS, if the team knows Sitecore and they really is a knowledgeable front-end team, they know React, they know Vue.js, they know Angular, I would definitely go with it. If they wish to choose something new. If they are provisioned with React and they would like to, or they wish to maybe try something new, definitely go with the Next.js, right? The newest versions of Sitecore support Next.js out of the box, so there's no need to choose something else in this case, right? If you wish to do the headless development, definitely go with the JSS. Maybe a question would be whether you are more like would go with front end, then choose JSS. If you wish to go with .NET, then yeah, ASP.NET Core and headless services for it. So if you would ask me whether you should use Sitecore JSS or SXA, then definitely go for it. Both modules are great. They have some drawbacks, they have some nuances, there is some learning curve, but once you embrace them, they will be more serving you than holding you back for sure. This presentation was supposed to be shown on the SUCCON. Probably you can see the template of the presentation, but unfortunately I was we were sick with the whole family for 3 weeks and I couldn't travel to Budapest, so at least I'm keeping this template for my presentation that I should do there, and I was really happy that I could do it today for you. So if you have any questions or anything about the presentation or anything else, you can ask now, or you can always ask on Slack, on my Twitter account, or on Stack Exchange. You can find me.
Hi, Peter. I have a question for you. So it was a nice presentation. I really loved it. The question is, with every Sitecore implementation, it's always pretty easy to implement, I would say, the first implementation. The problem comes with the support that comes up with the upcoming future, right? When we upgrade Sitecore, maybe to the latest versions, that's when Sitecore keeps trimming down some of the features, which might be required for a couple of clients where we might have explored a lot and maybe develop a lot of really difficult custom solution. Now, in this case, with JSS especially, how good is, have you got any experience in like migrating it or upgrading Sitecore from an older version to a newer version? Or what is the roadmap on it? Do we have any idea on it?
Yeah, as I mentioned with SXA, it's really easy to do the upgrade because they have some scripts baked in. So we have done it before, and it's really like a nice experience, I would say, for a developer or for the one who is doing the upgrade. It's really seamless, I would say, right? So also the content is migrated and upgraded and everything. So it's really easy. With JSS, of course, it's a bit different. So I would say with JSS, it's something similar as you did before, right? So either you need to choose the vanilla approach, where you are more or less installing a new version of Sitecore. You are deploying it then your old code. You need to more or less change the npm package versions and all of those stuff, right? And more or less with try and catch approach, you can fix all of the issues, right? Or you can just do it the way that you will upgrade the Sitecore and like step by step, like you will do it on the same machine, right? So it's I think there is a really good presentation from this year's SUCCON Europe by Sitecore community member. So definitely take a look on that one. That could help you.
Sure, thank you.
But by Martin Miles is the name of the guy. I remember. So,
thank you.
Any other question, guys? So hope no. Thank you, Peter, for such a great presentation. It is very useful. You clearly explained the difference between the SDK, framework, libraries, and what are the drawbacks on each, okay, and how it relates when with respect to the Sitecore Jss and XSA. Clearly you explained, and also you have provided us the decision when we have to go for XSA or JSS. It was really useful. Thank you, Peter, for your valuable time. So it's a nice presentation. And thank you
everyone
all
for joining also.
Yeah, thank you all participants for joining. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you all.